The glass shattered first. Then came the gunfire, sharp cracks that split the night air like thunder, echoing off the sleek glass towers of Gangnam. Seoul's neon lights flickered against the smoke rising from the wreckage, painting the scene in shades of red and gold, beauty and violence intertwined. Woo Jin's black sedan screeched to a halt outside his headquarters, tires screaming against asphalt, the vehicle's armored frame riddled with bullet holes that looked like angry constellations. Smoke billowed from beneath the crumpled hood, and the acrid smell of gunpowder and burning rubber filled the air. His security detail poured from the surrounding vehicles. Men in black suits with weapons drawn, their faces hard, their movements precise and lethal. But Woo Jin didn't wait for them. He kicked the car door open with such force that it nearly tore from its hinges, the metal groaning in protest. His 6-foot frame unfolded from the wreckage like a dark god emerging from chaos. Tailored black suit soaked with blood, some his own, most belonging to the men who'd been foolish enough to ambush him. His white shirt was torn at the collar, exposing the hard lines of his collarbone and the beginning of a scar that disappeared beneath the fabric. His jet black hair, usually perfectly styled, fell across his forehead in disheveled strands, and his dark eyes, those cold, empty eyes that had seen too much death, too much betrayal, surveyed the scene with the detachment of a man who had forgotten what it meant to feel anything at all. "Secure the perimeter," he commanded in Korean, his voice low and deadly calm. "Find whoever gave them our route. Bring them to me alive." His men scattered like shadows, efficient and silent, the kind of loyalty that came from fear and respect in equal measure. Woo Jin pressed a hand to his side where a bullet had grazed his ribs, feeling the warm stickiness of blood seeping through his shirt, but his face remained impassive. Pain was just another sensation he'd learned to compartmentalize, to lock away in the same dark corner of his mind where he kept everything else that threatened to make him human. He'd been numb for 3 years. 3 years since the night Park Min-seo, the woman he'd loved, the woman he'd trusted with every vulnerable part of himself, had betrayed him. 3 years since she'd lured him into that warehouse, smiled at him with those beautiful lying lips, and left him to burn while his enemies surrounded him like wolves scenting blood. He'd survived. She hadn't. But something inside him had died that night anyway. His ability to feel, to trust, to care. Touch became meaningless. Physical intimacy was just mechanics, empty and hollow. He moved through the world like a ghost inhabiting a body, powerful and untouchable and utterly devastatingly alone. Until tonight. Until her. Woo Jin pushed through the heavy steel doors of his building, leaving bloody handprints on the chrome handles. The lobby was all marble and glass, expensive and cold, a reflection of the man who owned it. His security team followed him inside, speaking rapidly into their comms, coordinating the lockdown. And then he saw her. Zuri Adeyemi stood near the bank of elevators, frozen like a deer caught in headlights. She'd clearly been working late. Her laptop bag was slung over her shoulder, her long braided hair pulled back into an elegant ponytail that exposed the graceful line of her neck. She wore a cream-colored blouse tucked into a fitted black skirt that hugged her curves, and even in his current state, Woo Jin couldn't help but notice the way the fabric moved with her breathing. The way her dark brown skin seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was beautiful, dangerously beautiful. And in that moment, as her wide eyes took in the blood, the smoke, the barely controlled violence radiating from him, all Woo Jin could think was, run. Run from me before it's too late. But Zuri didn't run. Instead, concern flooded her features, genuine, unguarded concern that had no place in his world. And she rushed forward, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor. "Boss, you're hurt." Her voice was accented, melodic, carrying the warm cadence of her Nigerian heritage mixed with perfect Korean pronunciation. "Don't." Woo Jin started, raising his hand to stop her, but the warning came too late. Zuri reached for him instinctively, her slender fingers wrapping around his bloodied hand, and the moment their skin made contact, everything stopped. Time. Breath. His heartbeat. And then it all came rushing back with the force of a tidal wave. A jolt of electricity shot through Woo Jin's body. Visceral, overwhelming, alive, like lightning striking dead earth. His nerve endings, dormant for so long, suddenly blazed to life. Heat flooded his veins. His pulse spiked so hard he thought his heart might explode. Every cell in his body oriented toward the point of contact, her soft palm against his scarred knuckles. And for the first time in 3 years, Woo Jin felt something. Desire. Raw, primal, terrifying desire. His breath caught audibly. His body went rigid. His eyes snapped to hers with an intensity that made Zuri's own breath hitch, and in that suspended moment, the entire world narrowed to the feeling of her hand in his. Her skin was warm, soft, everything his life wasn't. Her touch was gentle but firm, concerned but not pitying. And beneath the shock of sensation, Woo Jin felt something even more dangerous stirring: need. The need to pull her closer, to bury his face in the curve of her neck, to find out if the rest of her felt as impossibly right as this single point of contact. Boss? Zuri whispered, confusion and something else. Something heated, flickering in her dark eyes. The sound of her voice shattered the spell. Woo Jin jerked his hand away as if she'd burned him, stumbling back a step, his carefully constructed mask threatening to crack. His men were watching. His enemies could be watching. And here he was, reacting to his secretary's touch like a teenage boy experiencing his first crush. Unacceptable. Get back to your desk, he growled, his voice rougher than intended, almost harsh. Hurt flashed across Zuri's beautiful face, a flinch so subtle that anyone else might have missed it, but she recovered quickly, her expression smoothing into professional neutrality. Yes, sir. I apologize. She stepped back, clasping her hands together as if she could still feel the echo of his touch too, and for one insane moment, Woo Jin almost reached for her again. Instead, he turned on his heel and strode toward his private elevator, his spine rigid, his injured side throbbing in rhythm with his racing pulse. He didn't look back, couldn't look back. Because if he did, he might do something stupid. Something dangerous, something that would get them both killed. If you love Afro-Korean romance, mafia danger, forbidden desire, and stories that grab your heart, make sure you subscribe, because what's about to happen between Zuri and Woo Jin will shock you. Zuri Adeyemi had not come to Seoul for love. She'd come for revenge. Well, perhaps not revenge exactly. Zuri preferred to think of it as justice, but the distinction felt meaningless when she lay awake at night, remembering her brother's face, remembering the last time she'd seen Kofi alive via video call. His eyes bright with excitement as he told her about his big story, the investigation that was going to change everything. 2 weeks later, he was dead. The Korean police had called her in Lagos at 3 a.m. Her brother, they said in practiced, emotionless tones, had been found in an alley near Gangnam Station. Blunt force trauma, multiple stab wounds, gang-related violence. The case was closed within a month. Just another foreign journalist who'd gotten too close to the wrong people, another statistic in a city that had no shortage of darkness beneath its glittering surface. But Zuri knew better. Kofi had been careful, paranoid even. He'd been an investigative journalist for 10 years, had covered war zones and corruption scandals, had survived situations that would have broken lesser men. He wouldn't have been careless enough to walk alone in a dangerous area at night. He wouldn't have put himself in that position unless he'd been lured there. Unless someone had wanted him dead. Zuri had spent 6 months piecing together the fragments of her brother's investigation from his encrypted laptop, his hidden notes, the scattered breadcrumbs he'd left behind. What she'd found had led her here, to Seoul, to this job, to the pristine marble lobby of Woo Jin's building, where she now stood with trembling hands and a racing heart. Focus, she commanded herself, pressing her palm against her chest where her heart hammered like it was trying to escape. Focus on the mission. Focus on Kofi. Focus on anything except the way Woo Jin's hand had felt in hers. Except the way his entire body had tensed at her touch, every muscle going rigid like he'd been struck by lightning. Except the way he'd looked at her, really looked at her, for those few suspended seconds, with something raw and hungry and almost desperate flickering behind those cold, cold eyes. No, Zuri whispered to herself, pressing the elevator button with more force than necessary. No, absolutely not. She couldn't afford this. Couldn't afford to feel anything for the man who was quite possibly responsible for her brother's death. Because all of Kofi's research, every encrypted file, every photographed document, every late-night voice memo he'd recorded pointed to one organization, the Baeko Syndicate. And at the center of that syndicate, like a spider at the heart of a web, was Kwon Woo Jin. Woo Jin, whose legitimate business empire was just a front for money laundering, weapons trafficking, and political manipulation. Woo Jin, whose name appeared in connection with a dozen unsolved murders over the past 5 years. Woo Jin, who reported directly to the mysterious Chairman Kang, a man whose influence extended into every level of Korean government and criminal enterprise. Woo Jin, whose touch had just set every nerve ending in her body on fire. The elevator doors opened, and Zuri stepped inside, catching a glimpse of her reflection in the polished steel. She looked composed, professional, every inch the efficient secretary. No one would guess that beneath her calm exterior, her mind was screaming. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory from that last video call. "I'm close, Zuri. So close. There's someone at the center of all this. Someone everyone's protecting. If I can just get the proof." He'd never gotten the proof. But Zuri would. She'd infiltrated Woo Jin's organization, secured a position as his personal secretary, a miracle in itself, or perhaps fate's cruel joke. For 3 months, she'd been the perfect employee, efficient, discreet, professional. She'd earned his trust, or at least his reliance. And slowly, carefully, she'd been gathering evidence. Kofi's death would not be in vain, even if it meant working for a man whose presence made her skin tingle and her breath catch. Even if it meant denying the attraction that had been building between them since her first day, subtle, unspoken, but undeniable. Even if it meant betraying the way her body had responded to his touch tonight, like she'd been asleep her whole life and was only now waking up. He might have killed Kofi, she reminded herself as the elevator climbed toward her floor. He's a criminal, a monster, a man with blood on his hands. But even as she thought it, she remembered the shock in his eyes when their hands touched. The way he'd stumbled back, his composure cracking for just a moment. The way he'd looked almost vulnerable. "Stop it," Zuri hissed at her reflection. "Just stop." She had a mission. She had a purpose. And she absolutely, positively could not fall for Kwon Woo Jin. Inside his penthouse office, Woo Jin stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul, his hand, the one Zuri had touched, clenched into a fist. The city sprawled before him like a circuit board, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. A kingdom he ruled from the shadows. From here, 40 stories up, the world looked small, manageable, controllable. But he didn't feel in control. He felt like he was coming apart at the seams. Woo Jin stared at his palm as if it belonged to someone else, turning it over slowly. His skin still tingled where Zuri's fingers had wrapped around his hand. His pulse still raced. And beneath the carefully constructed ice he'd built around his heart, something dangerous was stirring. Something he thought was dead and buried. What the hell just happened? He hadn't felt anything in 3 years. Not pleasure, not pain, not desire. After Minso's betrayal, after he'd clawed his way out of that burning warehouse with third-degree burns on his back, and the knowledge that the woman he loved had sold him out to his enemies, something inside him had simply switched off. Self-preservation, his therapist had called it, back when he'd still pretended therapy might help. Emotional dissociation, trauma response, clinical terms for the simple fact that Kwon Woo Jin no longer felt anything when someone touched him. He'd tested it, methodically, over the years. Professional massage therapists, doctors administering treatment, even the women he tried to sleep with in desperate attempts to feel something, anything. Nothing. His body was just meat and bone, and touch was just pressure and temperature, and intimacy was just a word for something he'd lost the capacity to experience. Until tonight. Until Zuri's hand wrapped around his, and suddenly his entire nervous system had roared back to life like a machine someone had plugged back in. Woo Jin poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey from the crystal decanter on his desk, 50-year-old single malt that cost more than most people made in a year. He downed it in one burning gulp, welcoming the fire in his throat, the familiar ritual of destruction. It didn't help. He could still feel her. "This is a problem," he said aloud to the empty office, his voice rough. Because Zuri Adeyemi wasn't just his secretary. She was a threat. A carefully calculated, dangerous threat that he'd been monitoring since the day she'd walked through his doors. Woo Jin moved to his desk and opened his locked bottom drawer, pulling out a thick manila folder. Inside were surveillance photos, background checks, detailed reports compiled by his best investigators. Zuri Adeyemi, age 28. Nigerian national, degree in international business from the University of Lagos, fluent in English, Korean, and Yoruba. No criminal record, no suspicious associations. On paper, she was perfect. Exactly the kind of multilingual, highly educated professional his legitimate businesses needed. Except for one crucial detail. Her brother. Kofi Adeyemi, investigative journalist, found dead in an alley 6 months ago. officially ruled a gang-related homicide. Unofficially, he'd been asking questions about Chairman Kang's network, following money trails that led straight to the Baiko syndicate. Straight to Woo Jin. And 2 months after her brother's death, Zuri had applied for a position at his company. Coincidence? Woo Jin didn't believe in coincidences. He'd hired her anyway. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer, as the saying went. Better to have her where he could watch her, where he could monitor her every move, than to let her dig around on her own. He'd kept her at arm's length, never alone with her for long, never letting his guard down. And he'd discovered, over these past 3 months, that Zuri Adeyemi was smart, dedicated, and far too good at her job. She anticipated his needs before he voiced them. She moved through his world with grace and competence. And she never, ever asked questions about the parts of his business that had nothing to do with quarterly reports and board meetings. Which made her either the perfect secretary or the perfect spy. Woo Jin suspected it was the latter. And now his body had decided to betray him by responding to her touch like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. Unacceptable, he growled, slamming the folder shut. He couldn't afford this weakness. Couldn't afford to want her. In his world, attachment was a weapon people used against you. Desire was a liability. And falling for someone, especially someone who might be investigating him, who might be planning his downfall, was a death sentence. But even as he thought it, his body remembered. The warmth of her palm, the concern in her eyes, the way she'd trembled when he'd stepped back, like she'd felt it too, that impossible, electric connection. Woo Jin closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, trying to center himself, trying to rebuild the walls that had kept him safe for 3 years. It didn't work, because for the first time since Minso's betrayal, Kwon Woo Jin wanted something. And what he wanted was the one woman he absolutely could not have. Over the next 2 weeks, Woo Jin became obsessed. He told himself it was surveillance, that he was watching Zuri because she was a potential security risk, because he needed to know if she was planning something, because keeping tabs on her was simply smart business. But the truth was much darker, much more dangerous. He noticed everything about her. The way she walked into his office each morning at exactly 8:47 a.m., never early, never late, her hips swaying slightly in those fitted skirts that should be illegal, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a metronome counting down to his destruction. The way she always wore a different perfume, sometimes vanilla and amber, warm and sweet, sometimes jasmine and sandalwood, exotic and intoxicating, but never the same scent 2 days in a row, like she was consciously trying to keep him off balance. It was working. The way her voice softened when she spoke to him, respectful but never fearful, with just a hint of her Nigerian accent coloring the Korean words. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on her laptop, her brow furrowing slightly, making him want to smooth away that worry line with his thumb. The way she moved through his space, efficient, professional, but there was a grace to her movements that made him think of dancers, of music, of things he had no business thinking about during business hours. Or ever, really. Woo Jin found himself inventing reasons to call her into his office. Zuri, I need you to review this contract. The contract was fine. He'd already reviewed it 3 times. Zuri, bring me the updated financial reports. They weren't due until next week, but he requested them anyway. Zuri, I need you to accompany me to the meeting with the Japanese investors. His male assistant could have done it, but Woo Jin found himself wanting her presence, needing it in a way that made him furious with himself. Zuri, stay late tonight. We have work to finish. There was always work, but this was the first time in years he'd wanted company while doing it. And each time she entered his space, the air between them grew heavier, charged with something unspoken and dangerous. One evening, as Zuri leaned over his desk to point out a discrepancy in a quarterly report, Woo Jin caught the scent of her perfume. Tonight, it was something citrusy and bright, like sunshine bottled, and without thinking, he stood and moved behind her. Close. Too close. His chest nearly brushed her back, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body, could see the way her breathing changed, becoming shallow and quick. Here, he murmured, his breath warm against the shell of her ear as he pointed at the screen. This is the discrepancy you mentioned? Zuri froze, every muscle in her body going rigid. Yes, sir, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Right there. The numbers don't match the previous quarter's projections. Wu Jin placed his hand on the desk beside hers, not touching, but close enough that if either of them moved even slightly, their fingers would brush. He could feel her pulse hammering in her neck, could see the goosebumps rising on her exposed arm, could hear the catch in her breath. "You're very observant, Zuri," he said softly, his voice dropping to that dangerous register that made his enemies nervous and his allies wary. "You notice things others miss." It was both a compliment and a warning. Zuri turned her head slightly, and suddenly their faces were inches apart. Her dark eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and Wu Jin could see himself reflected in them, could see the hunger he was trying so hard to hide mirrored back at him. "I try to be thorough, sir," she whispered, and he noticed her hands were trembling where they rested on his desk. "You're trembling," he observed, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "I'm not." Zuri started to protest, but her voice shook, betraying the lie. Wu Jin leaned in just a fraction closer, his lips almost brushing the curve of her ear, close enough that he could feel the heat of her skin, smell the faint coconut scent of whatever oil she used in her braided hair. "You are," he confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why is that, Zuri? Are you afraid of me?" He should want her to be afraid. Fear kept people in line, kept them safe, kept them at a distance. But some dark, selfish part of him hoped she wasn't afraid at all. "No," Zuri breathed, and her voice carried a note of honesty that shouldn't have sent heat flooding through his veins. "I'm not afraid of you." "You should be," Wu Jin thought. "You should be terrified." Instead, he stepped back, creating distance that felt like cutting off his own oxygen supply, and returned to his chair as if nothing had happened, as if his heart wasn't racing, as if every cell in his body wasn't screaming at him to pull her closer instead of pushing her away. "That will be all for tonight," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You can go home." Zuri gathered her things with hands that were still shaking, her movements jerky and uncertain, and Wu Jin forced himself to look at his computer screen instead of watching her leave. He didn't trust himself to watch her walk away, not when every instinct was screaming at him to call her back. The close calls continued, each one more dangerous than the last. During a late-night strategy session in his office, Wu Jin had stood to retrieve a file from the cabinet, and Zuri had moved to help at the exact same moment. They'd collided, her soft body pressing against his hard frame, and for 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Wu Jin's hands had automatically gone to her waist to steady her, his fingers spreading across the curve of her hips, and the contact had sent electricity arcing through both of them. Zuri had gasped, her hands flying to his chest, and Wu Jin had felt his body respond with alarming intensity, heat pooling low in his abdomen, his pulse spiking, every nerve ending suddenly awake and demanding more. "Sorry," Zuri had whispered, but she hadn't moved away. Neither had he. They'd stood there, frozen, her palms burning through his shirt, his hands anchoring her against him, and Wu Jin had felt his carefully constructed control crumbling. He'd wanted to kiss her. God, he'd wanted to bury his face in the curve of her neck, to taste the spot where her pulse hammered visibly beneath her dark skin, to find out if she tasted as sweet as she smelled. Instead, he'd released her abruptly and stepped back, his expression hardening into ice. "Be more careful," he'd said coldly, watching hurt flash across her features before she masked it with professional composure. "Yes, sir. My apologies." Another incident occurred during a tense meeting with rival faction leaders, a negotiation that had gone south when the Yakuza representatives had attempted to renegotiate terms that had already been agreed upon. Voices had been raised, weapons had been subtly displayed. The tension in the conference room had been thick enough to cut, and then the lights had gone out. Emergency protocols kicked in immediately, his security team moving to secure Wu Jin, backup generators humming to life. But in those few seconds of complete darkness, someone had fired a shot. Glass shattered. Women screamed. Men shouted. And Wu Jin's only thought had been Zuri. She'd been in the back of the room, taking notes, and in the chaos, he'd moved on pure instinct. He'd found her in the darkness, her perfume guiding him like a beacon, and yanked her behind a pillar, his body covering hers completely as bullets tore through the space where she'd been standing seconds before. "Stay down," he'd commanded, his hand splayed across her lower back, pressing her against the cold marble, shielding her with every inch of himself. Zuri's breath had come in short, terrified gasps, her hands clutching his jacket, her face buried against his chest. He'd felt her heart hammering against his ribs, felt her trembling in his arms, and something primal had roared to life inside him. Mine. Protect. Keep safe. The lights had flickered back on after what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute. His security team had neutralized the threat. A sniper from a rival organization, already dead, the body being removed even as Woo Jin processed what had happened. But even after the danger passed, Woo Jin hadn't let go of Zuri immediately. He'd looked down at her, his hands still pressed against her back, and found her staring up at him with those impossibly dark eyes, wide with shock and something else, something heated and confused and utterly captivating. "Are you hurt?" he'd asked, his voice rougher than he'd intended. Zuri had shaken her head, but she was still trembling. "No, thank you. You saved my life." Woo Jin's gaze had dropped to her lips, full caught, slightly parted, so close he could feel her breath ghosting across his face. His hand had tightened on her waist, his thumb unconsciously stroking the curve of her hip through the fabric of her skirt. He'd wanted to kiss her, needed to kiss her, needed to confirm that she was alive, that she was safe, that she was his. No. Woo Jin had released her abruptly, stepping back so fast he nearly stumbled, and gestured for one of his men to escort her out. "Take Miss Adeyemi home," he'd ordered. "Make sure she's safe." He hadn't looked at her again. Couldn't look at her. Because if he had, he might have done something unforgivable, something that would put them both in danger, something that would expose the weakness he'd spent 3 years trying to eliminate. Late that night, after the building had been swept and secured, after the bodies had been removed and the damage assessed, Woo Jin stood alone in his office, his hands braced against his desk, breathing hard. He was losing control. The realization terrified him more than any bullet ever could. For 3 years, he'd been invincible, untouchable not because he was physically impervious, but because he had nothing left to lose. No attachments, no weaknesses, no soft spots for enemies to exploit. And now, in the space of 2 weeks, Zuri Adeyemi had become his greatest vulnerability. He wanted her with an intensity that bordered on obsession, wanted to protect her, possess her, claim her in every way possible, and the wanting was driving him slowly insane because he couldn't have her. She was investigating him. He was certain of it now. He'd caught her lingering near restricted areas, had noticed her carefully casual questions about his business dealings, had intercepted her searching through files on her computer that had nothing to do with her job. She was looking for something. Evidence, probably, proof of his criminal activities. Something she could use to avenge her brother's death. And the truly insane part? Woo Jin wanted to give it to her. Wanted to lay all his sins at her feet and let her judge him, condemn him, destroy him if that's what she needed. Because at least then she'd be looking at him. At least then she'd see him, all of him, the good and the terrible and the irredeemably broken. "You're losing your mind," Woo Jin told himself, pouring another drink. But even as he said it, his mind was already cataloging the files he'd need to protect, the evidence he'd need to hide, the truths he absolutely could not let her find. Not because he was afraid of what she'd do with the information, but because he was afraid of what she'd think of him when she learned the truth. Zuri, meanwhile, was conducting her own investigation with increasing desperation. She'd been systematically working her way through Woo Jin's files, both the digital ones on the company servers and the physical ones in his office. She'd installed monitoring software on his computer that copied his keystrokes and screenshots, had placed listening devices in his office during cleaning hours, had even befriended his driver to learn more about his movements. And what she'd learned had shaken her to her core. Because the evidence she was finding didn't match what she'd expected. Yes, Woo Jin was involved in the Baiko syndicate. Yes, his organization engaged in money laundering, weapons trafficking, and various other criminal enterprises. Yes, he was dangerous, powerful, and ruthless. But he wasn't the monster she'd expected. The documents she'd found showed a pattern of restraint. Operations called off because of potential civilian casualties, negotiations favored over violence, strict rules about collateral damage. There were files showing charitable donations made through shell companies, programs supporting orphanages and women's shelters, educational initiatives funded through carefully laundered money. And most disturbing of all, there were files about her. Not just surveillance reports. She'd expected those. But detailed protection orders. Instructions to his security team to keep her safe without her knowledge. Arrangements for a driver to follow her home each night, staying a careful distance behind to ensure she wasn't followed or threatened. Woojin had been protecting her. Why? Zuri had asked herself that question 1,000 times as she lay awake at night, her body still humming with the memory of his touch, his proximity, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. And then there were the documents about Kofi. She'd found them buried in Woojin's private files, password protected with encryption that had taken her weeks to crack. Inside was a complete dossier on her brother's investigation, every lead he'd followed, every source he'd contacted, every piece of evidence he'd gathered about the Baiko Syndicate, and a series of email exchanges that made Zuri's blood run cold. Emails from Kofi to an anonymous contact asking questions about Chairman Kang. Responses from that contact. Responses that came from an email address that resolved to one of Woojin's shell companies. Woojin had been helping Kofi, feeding him information, protecting him, warning him when he got too close to dangerous territories. And then, 6 months ago, the emails had stopped. The last message from Woojin's account was dated 2 days before Kofi's death. Your investigation into Chairman Kang has been noticed. You need to stop now. For your safety and your family's safety, walk away, destroy everything. I can't protect you if you continue down this path. Kofi hadn't listened, and 2 days later, he was dead. Zuri had stared at that email for hours, her mind reeling. If Woojin had been trying to protect Kofi, if he'd warned him to stop, then who had actually killed her brother? The answer was in the files too, buried deeper, encrypted even more carefully. Chairman Kang. The name appeared again and again in connection with Kofi's death. Orders, payments, cleanup operations. Chairman Kang had ordered the hit, and Woojin had tried to prevent it and failed. Zuri's world tilted on its axis. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd planned, suddenly felt uncertain. She'd come here seeking revenge against Woojin, but the real monster was someone else entirely. Someone Woojin worked for. Someone Woojin was bound to. You don't understand what you're asking me to do, she remembered him saying once when a business partner had requested something that crossed an ethical line. I answer to someone else. My hands are not my own. At the time, she thought it was an excuse. Now she wondered if it was a confession. Everything came to a head 2 weeks later during a late night in Woojin's office. It was past midnight. The building was empty except for security. Zuri had volunteered to stay late to finish an urgent report, a convenient excuse to access files she couldn't reach during normal business hours. Woojin had left hours ago, or so she'd thought. She'd waited until his car pulled away, until the coast was clear, and then she'd used her copied key to access the locked drawer in his desk, the one that contained his most sensitive documents. Inside, she found what she'd been searching for, a folder labeled Adeyemi, K, her brother's name. Zuri's hands trembled as she opened it, spreading the contents across Woojin's desk. Her heart hammered as she scanned document after document, surveillance photos of Kofi taken weeks before his death, meeting logs, financial transactions that traced back to Chairman Kang's accounts. And then she found it. A handwritten note in Woojin's precise script, dated 3 days before Kofi's murder. Chairman Kang has issued the order. I've tried to intervene, but my authority is limited. If I protect Kofi Adeyemi openly, I risk exposing our arrangement and endangering both him and his family. I've sent him a final warning. If he doesn't listen, I cannot save him. God forgive me. Zuri's vision blurred with tears. Her hands shook so badly the paper fluttered. Woojin had tried. He'd tried to save Kofi, and when he couldn't, he'd done the next best thing. He'd kept Zuri safe, protected her, hired her so he could watch over her, keep her close, make sure Chairman Kang's attention never turned to her. Oh, God, she whispered, pressing her palm to her mouth to stifle a sob. She'd been so wrong, so terribly, devastatingly wrong. Beneath Kofi's file, she found another folder, this one labeled with just her name, Adeyemi Z. With shaking hands, Zuri opened it. Inside were more surveillance photos, but these were different. They showed her arriving at the airport in Seoul, starting her new job, walking through the city. But attached to each photo were handwritten notes. Secured apartment in safe neighborhood. Rent paid through shell company. She must never know. Driver assigned for evening protection. Maintain minimum 50-meter distance. She values independence. Intercepted background check from rival organization. Information scrubbed. Her identity is secure. She smiled today. First time in 3 months. Note, increased security. Joy makes her visible. Zuri's tears fell freely now, spattering on the documents. Every word was evidence of Woojin's care, his protection, his what? Obsession? Duty? Something else entirely? She flipped to the last page and found a document that made her breath catch. It was a detailed report on Chairman Kang's organization. Names, locations, evidence of criminal activity, financial records. Everything someone would need to bring down the entire syndicate. And at the bottom, in Woojin's handwriting, for Zuri, when she's ready, when I can no longer protect her another way. He'd been compiling evidence. For her. To give her the justice she sought, even if it meant destroying himself in the process. What are you doing? A voice asked from behind her. Zuri spun around, her heart stopping. Woojin stood in the doorway of his office, still wearing his suit from earlier, though his tie was loosened and his jacket was gone. His white shirt was partially unbuttoned, exposing the column of his throat, and his dark hair was disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his expression that froze her. Not angry, not cold, but tired. Deeply, devastatingly tired. And beneath the exhaustion, something that looked almost like resignation. Zuri, he said quietly, stepping into the office and closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a death knell. Why are you looking at that? His hand rested loosely near the gun at his hip, not threatening, but present. A reminder of what he was, what he could do. Zuri's mouth went dry. She tried to speak, but no words came. The evidence was spread across his desk, damning and undeniable. There was no excuse she could give, no lie that would work. She was caught. She started, her voice breaking. I needed to know. Know what? Woojin asked, moving closer with predatory grace. His eyes were locked on hers, unreadable and intense. If you killed my brother, Zuri whispered. The words hung in the air between them like a knife. Woojin's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. And what did you discover? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Zuri looked down at the documents, at the evidence of his protection, his care, his guilt. Her tears fell onto the papers, smudging the ink. You tried to save him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You tried, and when you couldn't, you've been trying to save me instead. Woojin closed his eyes briefly, as if her words caused him physical pain. When he opened them again, they were filled with something raw and vulnerable, emotions he usually kept locked away behind walls of ice and steel. Yes, he admitted simply. Why? Zuri demanded, her voice rising with emotion. Why would you protect me? Why would you hire me, keep me close, risk everything? Because I failed him, Woojin interrupted, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Because I couldn't save your brother, and I couldn't let Chairman Kang take you too. Because... He stopped, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Because what? Zuri pressed, stepping closer despite every instinct screaming at her to be cautious. Woojin's eyes snapped to hers, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. Because from the moment you walked into my office for your interview, I knew you were dangerous, he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register that made her shiver. Because when you touched me that night, I felt something I thought I'd lost forever. Because every day you work here, every moment you're near me, I fall deeper into something I have no right to feel. Zuri's breath caught. What are you saying? Woojin stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him, sandalwood and smoke and danger. I'm saying that you've become my greatest weakness, Zuri Adeyemi, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that protecting you has become more important than my loyalty to Chairman Kang, more important than my organization, more important than my own life. I'm saying that I want you with an intensity that terrifies me, and I know that wanting you will destroy me. His hand came up, hovering near her face, but not quite touching, as if he was afraid of what might happen if their skin made contact again. I'm saying, he continued, his voice raw and honest in a way she'd never heard before, that my body only reacts to you, that you're the only person who's made me feel anything in 3 years, that every time you walk into a room, every time you speak, every time you breathe, I want things I have no right to want. Zuri's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might explode. Her entire body was trembling, with fear, with desire, with confusion and anger, and something else she was afraid to name. You should have told me, she whispered. About Kofi, about Chairman Kang, about all of this. And what would you have done? Woojin asked, his lips curving into a bitter smile. Believed me? Trusted me? Or would you have run straight to the police with evidence that would have gotten you killed within hours? He had a point. Zuri looked down at the documents spread across his desk. The evidence he'd been compiling, the protection he'd provided, the careful notes documenting her safety. Who is Chairman Kang? She asked quietly. Why does he have so much power over you? Woojin's expression darkened. He's the man who saved my life after Minso's betrayal. The man who gave me power, resources, a reason to live when I wanted to die. He's my mentor, my benefactor, and my chains. I owe him everything, and that debt has cost me everything else. Including your freedom to choose, Zuri said softly. Yes. Including the ability to save my brother. Yes, Woojin said, and the single word was heavy with guilt and regret. Zuri reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand over his heart. She felt him tense, felt his sharp intake of breath, felt the way his pulse skyrocketed beneath her palm. I came here for revenge, she admitted. I was going to gather evidence, expose you, destroy you if necessary. I thought you killed Kofi. I know, Woojin said. I've known since the day you arrived. But now? Zuri looked up at him, her dark eyes swimming with tears and confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Now I don't know what to do, because the man I thought you were doesn't exist, and the man you actually are is. A criminal, Woojin supplied. A killer. A man bound to an organization that destroys lives. Don't romanticize what I am, Zuri. The blood on my hands is real, even if I wasn't the one who killed your brother. You're also a man who tried to save him, Zuri said. A man who's been protecting me. A man who compiled evidence against his own organization because he knew I needed justice. Her hand was still on his chest, and she could feel his heart racing, could feel the barely controlled tension in his body. What happens now? She whispered. Woojin's hand finally made contact, his fingers gently cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The touch sent electricity arcing through both of them. That same impossible connection they'd felt the first time, but stronger now, more intense, laced with understanding and shared pain. Now, he said, his voice rough with emotion, you have a choice to make. What choice? You can take that evidence to the authorities, Woojin said, gesturing to the documents. I won't stop you. It will destroy Chairman Kang's organization, and it will destroy me along with it, but you'll have justice for Kofi. His thumb continued its gentle movement along her jaw, and Zuri found herself leaning into the touch despite everything. Or, she breathed. Or, Woojin continued, his eyes locked on hers with fierce intensity, you trust me. You let me handle Chairman Kang my way. It will take time, and it will be dangerous, but I can bring him down from the inside without putting you at risk. Why would I trust you? Zuri asked, even as her body betrayed her by pressing closer to his. Woojin's expression softened, and for the first time since she'd met him, Zuri saw him without the mask, vulnerable, honest, and achingly human. Because despite everything I am, despite all the reasons you shouldn't, you do trust me, he said softly. I can see it in your eyes. I can feel it in the way you're not pulling away from me right now. You wouldn't be here, wouldn't have stayed this long, if some part of you didn't believe I was telling the truth. He was right. God help her, he was right. Zuri's hand fisted in his shirt, pulling him fractionally closer. If I do this, if I trust you, what happens to us? Something dark and hungry flashed in Woojin's eyes. His other hand came to rest on her waist, his fingers spreading possessively across her hip. Nothing can happen to us, he said, even as his body contradicted his words by pulling her closer. It's too dangerous. Chairman Kang already suspects I've developed a concern for you. If he knew the truth, if he knew how much you actually mean to me, he'd use you against me. Or worse, he'd eliminate you to remove the weakness. Then we're trapped, Zuri whispered. Yes, Woojin agreed, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. We're trapped between what we want and what will keep you alive. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing each other's air, their bodies pressed together in a way that was both innocent and charged with desperate longing. Zuri could feel every hard plane of his body against her softer curves, could feel the tension thrumming through him, could sense the iron control he was exercising to keep from closing the final distance between them. Woojin, she whispered. Don't. He breathed against her lips, so close she could almost taste him. Don't say my name like that. Don't look at me like that. Because if you do, I won't be strong enough to stop. Maybe I don't want you to stop, Zuri said, the words escaping before she could think better of them. Woojin's control cracked. His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her fully against him, and his lips hovered a breath away from hers. So close, so impossibly close. She could see the war raging in his eyes, could feel the tremor running through his body, could sense the moment his legendary self-control began to crumble. Zuri, he said, her name a prayer and a curse on his lips. If I kiss you, if I let myself have even a taste of you, I won't be able to let go. I won't be able to pretend anymore, and that will put you in danger. I'm already in danger, Zuri pointed out, her voice breathless. I've been in danger since the moment I walked into your world. Not like this, Woojin insisted. Not the kind of danger that comes from being mine. Being mine. The words sent heat flooding through Zuri's body. She rose on her toes, bringing her lips even closer to his, and whispered, "Then make me yours. Consequences be damned." For one suspended heartbeat, Woojin's control held, and then it shattered completely. His lips crashed against hers with 3 years of pent-up hunger, 3 years of numbness giving way to overwhelming sensation. The kiss was fierce, desperate, consuming, like a man drowning and finally finding air. His hand slid from her waist to the small of her back, pressing her against him as if he could merge their bodies into one. His other hand tangled in her braids, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and Zuri made a sound that was half gasp, half moan. She'd been kissed before. This was nothing like that. This was possession, claiming. The breaking of every carefully constructed wall between them. Zuri's hand slid up his chest to his shoulders, her fingers digging into the hard muscle beneath his shirt, and she kissed him back with equal desperation. She could taste whiskey and mint on his tongue, could feel the barely leashed power in his body, could sense the way he was holding back even now, trying not to overwhelm her. "Don't hold back," she gasped against his mouth. "I'm not fragile." Woojin growled, actually growled, and suddenly she was moving, his hands on her waist, lifting her onto his desk, documents scattering beneath them. He stepped between her thighs, his body fitting against hers in a way that felt inevitable, fated, right. "Zuri," he breathed, his lips trailing from her mouth to her jaw, down the column of her throat. "God, Zuri." His hands were everywhere, her waist, her hips, sliding up her sides, careful and reverent despite the hunger driving them both. When his lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, Zuri's head fell back, a gasp escaping her lips. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, Woojin froze. His entire body went rigid against hers, and he pulled back, his breathing ragged, his eyes wild with desire and something else. Fear. "No," he said, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. "No, we can't. I can't." He stepped back, putting distance between them, and Zuri felt the loss like a physical ache. "Woojin! Chairman Kang has cameras," he said abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "Not in here, I made sure of that, but throughout the building. If anyone sees us together like this, if word gets back to him..." The reality of their situation crashed back over them like cold water. Zuri slid off the desk, her legs unsteady, her lips swollen from his kisses. "So what are we supposed to do? Pretend this didn't happen?" "Yes," Woojin said, even though the word clearly cost him. "For now, that's exactly what we do." "For how long?" "Until I can neutralize Chairman Kang," Woojin said. "Until you're safe. Until I can touch you without it being a death sentence." Zuri wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she didn't care about the danger, that whatever was growing between them was worth the risk. But she saw the determination in his eyes, the fear beneath the mask, and she understood. He'd already lost too much. He wouldn't risk losing her too. "How long will it take?" she asked. "To bring him down?" "I don't know," Woojin admitted. "Months, maybe longer. I have to be careful. Strategic. One wrong move, and we're both dead." "Then I'll wait," Zuri said, and she meant it. Woojin's expression softened with something that looked almost like hope. "You'll really trust me? After everything?" "I'll trust you," Zuri confirmed. "But Woojin?" "Yes? When this is over, when Chairman Kang is gone and we're both still alive, I want answers. All of them. No more secrets. When this is over," Woojin promised, "you can have anything you want, including me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Zuri gathered the scattered documents, organizing them back into their folders with trembling hands. Her lips still tingled from his kiss, her body still hummed with unfulfilled desire, but her mind was clearing. "I should go," she said. "Wait." Woojin moved to his safe and pulled out a small device, a phone, but not like any she'd seen before. Take this. It's encrypted untraceable. If anything happens, if you're ever in danger, press the red button. I'll come for you. No matter where you are, no matter what's happening, I'll come. Zuri took the phone, their fingers brushing in the exchange, and even that small contact sent sparks through both of them. One more thing, Woojin said, his voice low and serious. Don't investigate anymore. Don't take any more risks. Let me handle this. Promise me. It went against every instinct Zuri had. The need for answers, for justice, for action. But she saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate need to keep her safe, and she nodded. I promise. Good. Woojin stepped back, his mask sliding back into place, transforming him from the vulnerable man who'd kissed her senseless into the cold mafia boss who ruled Seoul's underworld. Go home, Miss Adeyemi. I'll see you at the office tomorrow. The formal address was like a slap, a reminder of the roles they had to play. Zuri gathered her things and moved toward the door, but she paused at the threshold, looking back at him. He stood in the middle of his office, surrounded by evidence of his crimes and his protection, looking more alone than any person should ever look. Woojin, she said softly. He looked up, surprise flickering across his features at the use of his first name. Thank you, she said, for trying to save Kofi, for protecting me, for everything. Something in his expression cracked, just for a moment, and she saw the man beneath the monster. Go, he said roughly, before I change my mind about letting you leave. Zuri went. But as she rode the elevator down to the ground floor, as Woojin's driver materialized to take her home, closer than 50 meters now, no longer hiding, as she clutched the encrypted phone in her hand, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Everything had changed tonight, and there was no going back. 1 week later, Zuri arrived at the office to find chaos. Police cars surrounded the building. Officers moved through the lobby with grim expressions, and Woojin's entire security team was being questioned. Her heart stopped. No. Please.
No.
She pushed through the crowd, flashing her employee badge, demanding answers. But no one would tell her anything, just directed her to evacuate the building, told her there'd been an incident. Then she saw him. Woojin, being escorted out in handcuffs. Their eyes met across the lobby, and in that moment, Zuri saw everything she needed to know in his expression. This was it. Chairman Kang had made his move, and Woojin was being taken down. But he mouthed 3 words to her, clear and deliberate. Use the phone. And then he was gone, disappeared into a police car, and Zuri was left standing in the chaos with her heart hammering and the encrypted phone burning in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands and found a message waiting for her, sent exactly 3 minutes ago. Emergency protocol activated. File number 4783 uploaded to device. This is the evidence against Chairman Kang. Complete what I started. Trust no one. I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to protect you, but I kept my promise to give you justice. Zuri opened the file with trembling hands, and her entire world shifted. Because the evidence wasn't just about Chairman Kang's criminal activities. It was about who Chairman Kang really was. It was about his connections that reached into the highest levels of government, into international crime syndicates, into organizations she'd never even heard of. It was about his real identity, a name she recognized, a name that made everything click into place, a name that explained why Kofi had died, why Woojin had been powerless to stop it, why this organization was so impossible to bring down. Chairman Kang wasn't just a crime lord. He was something far more dangerous. And as Zuri read the last document in the file, her blood turned to ice. Because there, in black and white, was proof that Chairman Kang had ordered a new hit. Target Zuri Adeyemi. Date, today, 6 p.m. Location, her apartment. Zuri checked her watch. 5:47 p.m. She had 13 minutes. And that's where part 1 ends. If you want to see what Zuri saw, if you want to know who Chairman Kang really is, if you want to watch Zuri fight for her life and discover the truth that Kofi died protecting, and if you want to see what happens when Woojin breaks out of custody to save the woman he can no longer live without, tell me in the comments. We want part 2. Don't forget to subscribe, because part 2 will be even darker, deeper, and more shocking. The truth about Chairman Kang will change everything. And the choice Zuri makes next will determine whether she and Woojin both survive, or if their forbidden love will be their ultimate destruction. Drop those comments. Hit that subscribe button. Part 2 is coming, and I promise you, you're not ready for what happens next.